The Rangers shored up a major weakness in their team by signing veteran closer David Robertson to a one-year deal. But will he close games for the Rangers, or will it still be Jose Leclerc? We're going to talk about all that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the World Series champion Texas Rangers. I'm Bryce Patrick, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan covering this team for 10 seasons, including all 5 as the founder and host of this show. Thank y'all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Patrick. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers. Hit subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform and on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment nearly any single thing below. Now, before we get into today's show, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now, the big news over last week, of course, immediately after I recorded Friday's show, I recorded that on Thursday morning, and the whole premise of that show was, are the Rangers good enough to win it all if they literally don't sign anybody else? And, of course, what do the Rangers do but sign anybody else right after I recorded that show? Because of course they did. But hey, I'm happy they did. I think it's a great sign. They signed David Robertson to a one-year deal in the $11 to $12 million range. They also brought back Travis Jankowski on a one-year, I believe, $1.75 million deal. And I think that might just be it. There are some minor league guys with minor league contract with spring training invites we'll talk about in the next segment. But signing David Robertson and bringing back Jankowski as a nice depth piece option. Robertson is, I think, a fantastic deal. He's pretty much exactly what the Rangers needed, a guy who is a veteran, who has got closing experience, who's been one of the more consistent, reliable relievers the last couple of years. I mean, he's been in the big leagues for a long time. He made his debut with the Yankees and won a World Series with the Yankees. That's how long he's been in the big leagues, because it's been a hot minute since that has happened. It's been in the bigs for 15 years, every year since 2008. Outside of the 2020 season, he had a rough year in 2019 with the Philadelphia Phillies, a ERA over 5. He pitched for Team USA in the Olympics that year and kind of earned himself a second shot. I mean, he came back in 2021, was solid with the Rays, but the last couple of years he's been just very, very good for a combined 4 different teams. Signed with the Cubs in 2022, was solid that year, then was traded midseason to the Phillies, and then last year signed with the Mets and was fantastic with them. Was traded at midseason to the Marlins, where he was less fantastic, shall we say, but still has been very good, very consistent the last couple years. Not a guy who's going to blow anybody away with his stuff. A cutter, curveball, slider kind of guy. Has a changeup that he throws every once in a while, but he had a 3.03 ERA last year, 18 saves in 65 and a third innings, 78 strikeouts. So still getting those strikeouts. Not a guy who relies on heavy velocity, which is good because, you know, when you've been in the big leagues for 15 years and you're going into your age 39 season, you start to worry about, well, what if he can't throw nearly as hard as he did back in the day? Well, he throws a cutter, and it's about the same pretty much every time out. So you're not really worried about that and that kind of regression. And seeing that consistency is something that the Rangers bullpen last year really could have used, of just a guy. They know what they're going to get out of him. And I think that puts the Rangers pen in a very good place right now. I don't know if they're going to sign anybody else in terms of adding to their bullpen, but right now the top end of their bullpen, the guys who I feel pretty confident, almost 100% sure that these guys are going to make the opening day bullpen, barring some kind of injury. You have Jose Leclerc, David Robertson, Josh Sborz, Kirby Yates, and Brock Burke. Now, if Brock Burke is your 5th guy that you mentioned in your bullpen, I feel like it's a pretty solid place to be with your pen. Burke is coming off a really rough year. We saw how good he can be, the top-end upside of a Brock Burke in 2022. Granted, there were fewer high-leverage games, fewer winning situations there, but I don't think he's going to be bit as much by the home run ball this year. I felt like that kind of felt like an outlier of allowing 2 home runs per 9 innings. That was not really something that I worried much about Brock Burke until last year. But I predict a pretty nice bounce back season for him. And then your other options for the next guys up in the pen, you've got your Rule 5 pick, Carson Coleman, who was drafted from the Yankees in that Rule 5 draft. You have Antoine Kelly, the lefty, who's got fantastic stuff. I would be surprised if he doesn't make his major league debut at some point this season. I'm really excited to see what he looks like in a big league pen, and I'm honestly shocked that he didn't get a look last year with how incredibly rough this bullpen was. Then you've also got Jonathan Hernandez, Mark Church, Grant Anderson, maybe Zach Kent. We'll see if the Rangers view him more as a starter or they could use him for a long relief guy. I think that might be his most likely option as a guy who, could be your... I think at a camp, it might be that Zach Kent is your number 6 starter. I mean, not that they're going to go with a 6-man rotation, but just if there's an injury to a Cody Bradford, Nathan Eovaldi, John Gray, any of the guys who are starting the season in the rotation, I think that Kent is definitely going to get a look. It's probably going to be between him and Owen White as that next guy up, but this bullpen is looking much better than it was last year. Granted, I feel really good about Jose Leclerc and Josh Boers both coming off of that incredible postseason run. I mean, just absolutely fantastic postseason run. But it's not like Rangers Nation, and myself included, trusted them a whole lot during the regular season. I kind of came back around on Jose Leclerc towards the end of the year and felt, how can you not feel phenomenal about him in the playoffs with what he was doing? I mean, there's really only one game that he blew. And, it didn't end up mattering. It gave the Astros some nice false hope in that Game 5. I mean, it was really painful for a couple of days for the rest of us. But, hey, it just set up some extra drama. That's all Jose Leclerc was doing. But I trust him to be much more consistent this year. Coming off of, last year he was really solid during the regular season. I mean, he was a little rough early on with the walks, and that's why he lost his closer job, and then didn't get back into it until about the end of the year. Still had a problem with the walks all year long, 4.5 walks per 9 innings, but still the strikeout numbers were there. The ERA was below 3. It was below 3 the last couple years, both years. So I wouldn't expect that Jose Leclerc is going to lose his closer job to David Robertson. I think there's definitely going to be some competition in spring training. We'll see between Leclerc and Robertson. I think those guys are going to be pretty much the only ones under consideration for that closer role coming out of spring training. I wouldn't be surprised if Josh Boers is kind of in the mix, and Kirby Yates has got quite a bit of experience closing out games. And I think that's something that Bruce Bochy definitely values, a guy who has been in that role, who has excelled in that role, and who knows what it takes, and he feels like he can count on that guy to close out games and get him some wins in the regular season. We saw that last year with Will Smith. Granted, it was basically because Will Smith was the only reliever that he could trust to not give up a bunch of runs almost every single time out from that stretch in late April and most of May and a little bit of early June. Smith was a reliable closer, and he is a big part of why the Rangers had that big of a lead in the division in that first half. And just because he wasn't very effective towards the back half of the season and didn't pitch very much or very well in the playoffs when he was there, it doesn't mean it's not valuable what he provided that Rangers team during that stretch. But, the rest of this bullpen, it felt honest. I felt insane looking at this bullpen saying, hey, these guys have good enough stuff to be fine big league relief options. Again, we've seen it a million times with Spores. It's just about the health and the consistency and all of that good stuff. But with this option, with signing David Robertson to this deal, I feel like it gives the Rangers just someone that they know they can rely on. And they're not really as worried about, okay, is this guy going to just be completely unusable? Like Jonathan Hernandez last year was a guy who I thought going into spring training, this is going to be one of your 7th, 8th inning high leverage guys. And he's going to be probably pretty solid. Probably not spectacular, but solid enough. And then last year, he just could not find the strike zone to save his life and just was not a usable reliever pretty much at all. And that is something that the Raiders can't have happen to too many of their relievers. And I talked about on Friday's show about things that can't go wrong for the Rangers, and Jose Leclerc backing up and being ineffective this year was something that they couldn't stomach. It just would sink them pretty badly early on. Now I think that's not the case. By having Robertson there and having another guy who you could feel pretty confident in throwing as your closer for the full season if you need to. More so, I think, than Kirby Yates. I mean, Yates has got that, those years where he was absolutely insane, but I feel like there's more variance with him. But with David Robertson, he provides that value, that consistency, that dependability that I think is really overlooked and really difficult to find in a reliever. Coming up, we're going to look at some of these minor league spring training invite guys and why I think one can really, really stick out and have a great year with Rangers. Right after this word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Factor Meals. Get started on your resolutions with Factor, so you're ready for the new year. Factor's ready-to-eat meal delivery takes the stress out of meal planning and sets you up for success in the new year. Skip the grocery store, the prep work, the cooking fatigue. Instead, get chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals delivered directly to your door. With over 35 meals to choose from per week, including options like keto, calorie smart, vegan, veggie, plus over 55 weekly add-ons, you'll have a ton of nutritious and flavorful options to kickstart your resolutions. Factor now offers loads of snack options like breakfast, smoothies, juices, snacks, and more to keep me going no matter what's on my schedule. If you need a special occasion meal, Gourmet Plus is the perfect solution. If you're looking for fast, upscale options done easily. When things get hectic, Factor is flexible. Change your order up with weekly plans from 4 to 18 meals per week, or pause or reschedule your deliveries at any time. Factor has everything I need for a week of flavorful, nutritious eats. In addition to ready-to-eat meals, they have cold-pressed juices, smoothies, energy bites, extra protein, veggie sides, and more to keep me energized during frantic times. Head to factormeals.com/LockedOnMLB50 and use code LockedOnMLB50 to get 50% off. That's code LockedOnMLB50 at factormeals.com/LockedOnMLB50 to get 50% off. Locked On has launched the first ever 24/7 national sports streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Now, a shout out to everydayers for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. We're back on Wednesday talking about why I think it's less likely the Rangers end up with a reunion with Jordan Montgomery based on some reporting from last week from Evan Grant of the Dallas Morning News. Now, this Rangers bullpen, I think, is in a much, much better place, and I think, obviously, it was the weak point for the Rangers last year. If they had had just a mediocre bullpen, I think that could have been a team that won, 98, 100, maybe even 102 games, because they lost so many games, so many games, and especially the second half of the season. And in that awful stretch in August, it felt like everything was falling apart in August, but really the bullpen all year long was just so incredibly inconsistent, unpredictable, and just terrible, honestly. And I think with just some bounce backs from internal candidates, plus these two new guys that the Rangers added, having these veteran guys like Kirby Yates, like David Robertson, plus if you can have, Jose Leclerc and Josh Sborz ride that confidence that they gained from that incredible October run, then I feel like this is a bullpen that is in a really, really good place. And, all it has to be is okay. It doesn't have to be absolutely insane and amazing, because we know how good this offense is, and I think the starting rotation should be pretty good for the first half, maybe just fine for the first half of the season. And then obviously we'll talk a little bit more in the third segment about the rehab updates from Jacob deGrom and Max Scherzer, but we did get some positive updates there. So once you come around to postseason time, you've got several relievers with experience in the postseason, and two coming off of one of the best postseason reliever runs in Rangers franchise history in Leclerc and Sborz, and you got to feel much better about the position of this club when it gets to playoff time. It will be hopefully a little bit less stressful when the Rangers turn to the pen. I'm not going to give any guarantees, because predicting what a bullpen is going to do, let alone any individual reliever is going to do for a season, feels like a fool's errand. But I think the Rangers are in a good place, and they got some really interesting signings that they did this week because, of course, again, right after I said that the Rangers are probably not going to sign anybody else, they end up signing 3 guys to minor league deals with spring training invites. Those guys were left-handed pitcher Blake Taylor, formerly of the Houston Astros. They also signed infielder Matt Duffy, and they also signed Jared Walsh, a former All-Star with the Angels, who was designated for assignment, a guy who had, I think of these 3, Jared Walsh is the most interesting for me. He's coming off just an incredibly rough season, just honestly dreadful. The last couple of years, really. I mean, it's been a rough stretch for Jared Walsh. He was an All-Star back in 2021 with the Angels. His age 27 season, played in 144 games that year, had an OPS of 850, 29 home runs, 34 doubles. He was an All-Star. He was absolutely deserving. He's a left-handed hitter, plays first base and right field. And while I don't think he's going to, take the starting job from Nathaniel Lowe or the starting job from Adolis Garcia in right field, or maybe he'll end up being the Rangers DH. I think that's probably the most likely path forward. But the reason that it's been so rough for Walsh the last couple of years is because he suffered from neurological issues. They have affected him, in a really, really big way the last couple of years. I mean, they affected his balance and his spatial awareness, which is pretty important to have spatial awareness when you're trying to hit a baseball coming at you at 100 miles an hour. It's kind of important to have that spatial awareness to be able to hit that baseball, and also your balance as well. It also led to insomnia, headaches, tremors, and fatigue. He just said he's kind of been in a fog the last couple of years. It's just been really, really difficult for him to not only stay on the major league field but contribute basically at all. I mean, last year he only played in 39 games for the Angels in his age 29 season, so he is just 30. He is still pretty young. But last year he had a slash line of 125, 216, 279. That is an OPS plus of 33. Basically a third of the contributor of a major league average hitter. And he was a first baseman slash DH slash right fielder, a guy who really needs the bat to be valuable. But one thing we've seen about this Rangers team is they have done a really good job the last couple of years of developing hitters and getting the most out of kinds of fringe hitters. And one of the guys who I think most benefited from it, at least the last couple of years, of guy who you didn't think of as a very great, very super helpful bat, was Travis Jankowski. And he had a phenomenal first half of the season. Last year, obviously the second half was not quite as phenomenal, but in 107 games last year, I mean, he had a 357 OPS and a 689, 357 on base percentage. That would have been a very terrible OPS. His OPS was 689, but he was a solid contributor to that Rangers team. Just having, with him, a guy with very little power, being on base at an elite rate. He led the Rangers in steals last year, even though he only had under 300 plate appearances with 19 steals. And he led it by a wide margin, too. He was 5 ahead of the next place guy, which was Marcus Semien at 14. He was 19 for 20 in stolen base attempts. That's a valuable player. And the Rangers got a lot out of him. And Walsh, if he's got these neurological issues behind him, if he's able to be healthy and a contributor, this hitting staff is phenomenal. They've done such a good job of getting the most out of these guys. We saw Leody Taveras have a pretty good breakout season last year. We've seen how much Adolis Garcia has improved over the last couple of years. That was a huge developmental win, getting what they got out of Adolis Garcia, of getting him to cut down on those swings and misses out of the zone and force him to be a little bit more of a patient hitter. We saw what the Rangers got out of Jonah Heim last season, and Nathaniel Lowe has had a couple of breakout moments, and we'll see what they get out of him this year. But still, I think that the Rangers have done a pretty good job of getting the most out of the guys on the fringes. They got a league average OPS from Robbie Grossman last year. Zeke Duran had that incredible first half when he was stepping up for an injured Corey Seager. Now, it was a little bit rough down the back half, but still, that's a lot of different guys the Rangers have gotten the most out of, gotten more than people expected out of for their offense. And there's not going to be a whole lot of pressure on him. Again, it's not a major league deal, but it's a guy who you think could, if things go right, end up being the Rangers DH for a little bit. Now he's going to have some competition for that DH spot in Ezekiel Duran, in Wyatt Langford, in Justin Foscue. And I don't know if he's going to have a better spring training than any of those guys. But adding a veteran like him kind of goes to show all three of those young guys that are going to be competing for that everyday DH spot that they're not just going to be handed that spot. It's not just, here you go, this is yours. You haven't really, two of them haven't made the major leagues at all. And Duran has done pretty well in his major league career so far. But I think it's a good sign to say, hey, you're going to have to fight for it. You're going to have to earn this spot on the big league club. You're going to have to earn everyday at bats. Yes, you have some, high prospect stock. Yes, we think you've got a lot of potential in all three of those guys, but it's not just going to be handed to you on a silver platter. You're going to have to earn it. You're going to have to beat out those other guys. You have to show us that you can contribute to helping this team win games at the major league level right now in order to earn those everyday at bats. And that's a good thing to have in your clubhouse. That is a sign of a winning organization. That is what good teams do. They don't just hand things to their young players. They force them to earn it. Coming up, we're going to look a little bit more at this good update the Rangers got from Max Scherzer and Jacob deGrom right after this word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl season to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. If you're wanting to bet on my large adult son, Patrick Mahomes, I'm wearing my Texas Tech t-shirt supporting the guy who I think could be the Super Bowl MVP. I know he's the favorite according to FanDuel, and I think that's a pretty solid bet. I can't remember what exactly the odds are, but hey, if you're betting on these Chiefs to win, if you are betting on the 49ers to win, there are all kinds of different bets that you can do on Super Bowl 58. FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored. New customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Now, the Rangers will start their season shorthanded with a combined 5 Cy Young awards on the injured list in Jacob deGrom and Max Scherzer. They also have Tyler Mahle coming at some point this season. But during FanFest this weekend, the Rangers got some positive updates on their 2 aces that are coming back from injury. Jacob deGrom has started throwing from 90 feet, and he hasn't had any setbacks yet since going under the knife for UCL repair surgery in June of last year. The ideal timeline is expected to be probably sometime around August, and now that we're a little more than 6 months removed from that UCL surgery, and he's already started throwing, and there haven't been any setbacks, that is some positive news from Jacob deGrom. Obviously, the best pitcher in the world when healthy. The Rangers are hoping to get him back as soon as possible, but mostly, again, the goal is to kind of, in my opinion for this season, the Rangers will probably say it differently, but the goal is to tread water, be fine, be in the hunt by the time these 2 aces and 3 starting pitchers come back. So where once you add those guys, then it's a nice boost to your season, and you go hopefully and get a starting 4 of your rotation in the playoffs of Jacob deGrom, Nathan Eovaldi, Max Scherzer, and Tyler Mahle, and you are in a very, very good spot. But very positive update from Jacob deGrom, and another positive update from Max Scherzer, who underwent surgery to repair a herniated disc on December 15th. He had suffered a back injury that kept him out of the World Series, knocked him out after one start of Game 3, was put on the IL, and he thought he was recovering pretty well, but had a MRI that revealed a herniated disc and had that surgery in the middle of December. He was initially expected to come back from this surgery in June or July, and that is the updated timeline, is that he has not had any setbacks, but the important update is that he's made it through the first 6 weeks of recovery from that injury, and that is the most dangerous time for setbacks. So if there was going to be some kind of setback for Max Scherzer, it would most likely happen in that first 6 weeks, since we have passed that time. Hopefully it's looking like there aren't going to be any setbacks with him. And that is a huge boost for the Rangers. He is probably going to be the first of these 3 injured pitchers to come back from injury, and that is a good sign whenever he does come back. It looks like that will probably push Cody Bradford to the bullpen and have a top 3 of Eovaldi, Scherzer, and Gray, as opposed to a top 3 of Eovaldi, Scherzer, and Dane Dunning or Andrew Heaney, depending on which one of those guys is pitching better at the moment. But that is a good sign for Max Scherzer. The Rangers need all 3 of these guys to hopefully come back and be around the ideal version of themselves. They're not going to get peak Max Scherzer of striking out like 14 batters per 9 with a 2.50 ERA of the Cy Young form of Max Scherzer. But even the Scherzer that they got last year in those 8 starts where he had an ERA around 3.20 was striking out a decent number of guys and didn't have the same home run issues that plagued him with the Mets earlier that season. That was a very helpful pitcher. That was a very good number 2 in their rotation at that point, and a guy who they could definitely trust to start some playoff games. It was a little rough for him in the playoffs because, again, he was coming back much sooner from injury than anyone expected. I mean, the thought was he was definitely done by the time the World Series would be over, and he got back in time for the ALCS because Max Scherzer is a guy who is just so insanely competitive and such a huge part of this team, and I think it's easy to overlook those 3 guys in Mahle, Scherzer, and DeGrom because they're not going to be there until June at the earliest. But they are a huge part of this team and a huge reason why I believe this team is, as presently constructed, good enough to win the World Series. Now, even if one of these 3 guys doesn't come back this year from injury, which I don't think is going to be the case, there was no update on Mahle. He had his Tommy John surgery a little bit earlier than Max Scherzer, than Jacob DeGrom did. DeGrom had his surgery in June of last year, and Mahle, I believe his was in May. He is a little bit younger, a little bit less mileage on his arm, so I think he'll be coming back a little bit sooner, sometime around midseason. In my estimation, I'd say sometime around the middle of July. That will be another big boost to this Rangers rotation. We'll see what all these guys look like when they come back from injury. I think that Max Scherzer is probably going to be the one with the least rust on him because he will have missed the least amount of time, and his injury, it's not one that you say, okay, it takes quite a bit of time to get fully healthy. Because with Tommy John surgery, usually there's still a little bit of issues with command that first season or so after returning from Tommy John surgery. And then usually the second season is when those pitchers start to regain form. We saw that very much be the case with Jonathan Hernandez. When he came back from Tommy John surgery, the command was way off, to put it mildly. So I'm hoping that we can see a little bit better, more healthy, more consistent version of Jonathan Hernandez this year, but he is not going to have nearly the impact that all 3 of these starting pitchers are going to have. And again, if the Rangers were to make one more signing, then I think Jordan Montgomery would probably be it. But let's look at the rest of this reliever class, because some people were thinking, I don't know, $11 to $12 million for David Robertson. That feels like a lot of money for a reliever. And it's a decent amount for a reliever, but it's not that much more than some of these other guys are getting. I mean, Josh Hader signing an average of $19 million for a 5-year deal. Jordan Hicks getting around $11 million average for 4 years. And granted, San Francisco thinks that he is going to be a starting pitcher, which is interesting. But and then you look at Robert Stevenson, who is definitely going to be a reliever and signed a 3-year, $33 million deal with the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. Ronaldo Lopez getting $30 million over 3 years. Again, they think he's going to be a starter. But, I mean, look at what Craig Kimbrell got. 1 year, $13 million, and he did not have a better year than David Robertson. That was a deal with the Baltimore Orioles, and Aroldis Chapman getting 1 year, $10.5 million. I feel better about signing David Robertson to a 1 year, even if it's $12 million deal, than I would signing Chapman to a 1 year, $10.5 million deal. And then Hector Neris, who got 1 year, $9 million from the Cubs after it was reported that he was looking for a 3-year, $50 million deal. That did not happen. There are some incentives for the deal for Hector Neris that could push it to 2 years, up to $24 million. But that's just kind of what this market looks like. That is about what these guys are getting, and having someone who is as consistent as Dave Robertson, putting him in your pen and having him, eat up those innings and be at worst fine. I don't think he's going to have a horrible season. Now, I could be proven wrong, because Again, predicting what relievers are going to do, even the ones who have been in the league for 15 years, is a bit of a fool's errand, but having that reliability in the back end of your pen is incredibly important, and having just somebody there that you feel like, all right, at the very worst, this guy's going to be fine, and we'll piecemeal it together with whoever else is an option in that bullpen. And then you look at this team as a whole and where they are, and I said this on Friday's show before they signed David Robertson and brought back Travis Jankowski, that I thought this 2024 team was going to be better than 2023. A team that won the World Series, and they got better. Now, granted, just because they're better than 2023, even if they are, which, again, I think they will be, it doesn't guarantee that, oh, for sure this team is going to win the World Series yet again. That's not necessarily the case. Because there are some other teams that got better as well. I mean, the Braves got better this offseason, and they were insanely good during the regular season in 2023. The Dodgers, I think they got a little bit better by adding literally every player under the sun, and Shohei Ohtani and Yamamoto, and a few other guys that are also pretty good. So the Rangers are going to have to be a decent amount better next year, or this year, than they were last year to win the World Series yet again. But this team's in a very good position. Signing David Robertson, shoring up that bullpen is a very good place to start. And even if they don't make any more signings, which, again, as I say this, simply saying that maybe will indicate, will force Chris Young to make a signing just to prove me wrong, which I'm totally okay with. Even if this is the team that they roll into spring training with, I think they are in a phenomenal place. The David Robertson signing is huge for them and should not be overlooked. Neither should be the Travis Jankowski signing. But hey, this is a team coming off a World Series, reloading, revamping, and shoring up their biggest weakness heading into 2024. It is a phenomenal time to be a Texas Rangers fan. That's going to do it for today's show. Thank y'all so much for listening and subscribing. I'll be back on Wednesday. And until next time, don't forget to enjoy World Series champion Texas Rangers baseball.